Right now, we have a crisis of corruption in American politics. And since we're live on Fox, let me take this opportunity to address directly the Fox audience. We have 2 United States senators in Georgia who have blatantly used their offices to enrich themselves. This is beyond partisanship. And the reason to your question that I talk so much about health and jobs and justice for all the people is that we can unite behind that program. We've lost 9 rural hospitals in Georgia in 10 years. We can reopen them. We can invest in infrastructure to build jobs, revitalize our communities, create opportunity, raise the minimum wage so that people doing an honest week's work can not just survive, but can thrive. And yes, pass landmark civil rights and voting rights legislation to secure equal justice for all. And I humbly and respectfully request the support of everyone who is tuned in on Fox right now. And I'd love for you to log on to ElectJohn, electjon.com. That's electjon.com. Make a contribution to our efforts here in Georgia.
And one more quick one while we've got you. Any concern that the allegations of wrongdoing against Reverend Warnock could possibly be a drag on the Democratic ticket next week?
None whatsoever. Reverend Warnock addressed this issue a year ago. And here's the bottom line. Kelly Loeffler has been campaigning with a Klansman. Kelly Loeffler has been campaigning with a Klansman. And so she is stooping to these vicious personal attacks to distract from the fact that she's been campaigning with a former member of the Ku Klux Klan. I mean, we deserve better than that here in Georgia. And I want to encourage everybody to make a plan to vote on Tuesday.
I'm Sarah Kendzior, the author of the best-selling books The View from Flyover Country and Hiding in Plain Sight.
And I'm Andrea Chalupa, a journalist and filmmaker, and the writer and producer of the journalistic thriller Mr. Jones.
And this is Gaslit Nation, a podcast covering corruption in the Trump administration and rising autocracy around the world.
And we are excited to join you in a new year, new us, same Republican Party. We're going to be talking about that horror show today, but first we wanted to share some announcements. Obviously, this is a time of mass trauma. Everyone is hurting, whether they show it or not. This is unprecedented. We're living through a dangerous crossroads that's going to be studied generations from now very closely by historians to make sense of all this. So congratulations on all of us for getting to live through interesting times. What tends to happen after times of mass trauma is you have a period of wilding out. You see some of this in my film, Mr. Jones, where Walter Duranty, the Moscow bureau chief for the New York Times, who helped the Soviets cover up Stalin's genocide famine in Ukraine, you see him hosting a wild party with sex, drugs, and hedonism. He really did live that lifestyle. He participated in the infamous satanic orgies in 1920s Paris with the very well-known and celebrated Satanist Aleister Crowley. They would do horrific things. It was pretty nasty. And that wasn't uncommon. I mean, they just had lived through the Great War. Duranty was a war correspondent. He wrote about how he was hanging out with a group of soldiers, having lunch. They went off and came back killed. Their bodies rolled in, charred, headless. So when people live through trauma, they deal with it in different ways. And we are going to be entering a period of a lot of disturbing news stories coming to the surface of how people are going to be dealing with that trauma. So please do what you can for yourself, for your loved ones, to build a relationship, a conversation with your trauma. Talk to it, get to know it, seek the help that you need to help handle it. I'm doing that because I have studied difficult times in history before. I've seen how trauma endures. And I've seen how trauma impacts generations. I've seen how trauma has shaped countries' futures. And it's just something that we have to deal with. We have no choice. And all public servants on the front lines have to understand that the trauma now is the national trauma, the mass trauma is as important to deal with as, say, Kremlin aggression, corruption, any of it, because it's going to express itself in a lot of challenging ways. So one way we want to help you in get through these difficult times is to do what has helped me tremendously, and that is make art. Make bad art, make good art, make whatever art you can. One thing that I realized about myself is, in the lead up to the election in November, I was trying to keep a journal. I was thinking, oh, this is so historic. I should be writing this down. I tried it. I sat down with a journal. I got through one paragraph. I'm like, this is boring. I can't do this. And so what I did instead was I wrote a screenplay. And it was a screenplay that I'd been wanting to write for a very long time. And it just came out instantly. And it was about George Orwell and his wife, Eileen O'Shaughnessy, living through the horror of World War II, where they felt like they had no future. And Eileen's beloved brother, Eric, who was a doctor in World War II, he went off to Dunkirk, and the last sighting of him was just sitting there in a cafe watching the Germans explode the sky. And it was almost like he just stared at the devil and couldn't move, and he just succumbed to that evil. And Eileen would wander the streets of London with Orwell, just in shell shock over the loss of her brother. And I understood from writing this screenplay, this history I'd studied for years, I saw it completely differently because I too was grappling with these issues. Is there a future? What kind of future is there? And I was able to say what I needed to say and how I was feeling through art. I couldn't sit down and write it in plain sentences. I needed to express it some other way. And I think a lot of people are like that, whether you're an artist or not, whether you can write or not, whether you can create music or not. Just go out and make something, say what needs to be said, help yourself that way, consume art, enjoy art, encourage others to make art, sit down with your kid and make a drawing, whatever you need to do. It does help tremendously. And so as part of this, we have a brilliant idea from one of our production managers who helps us make this show. And her name is Carlin Daigle, and she's a wonderful organizer in Portland, Maine. And we've talked about her brilliant work before. We'll link to some of it in the show notes for this episode, which you could always find on our Patreon page for free. We publish every episode on our Patreon page. You could access it for free and get the show notes there. We treat that like our dynamic, active website. So please go to the Patreon page for this episode for any show notes when the episodes come out. And so Carlin came to us with a really great idea that we're excited to share with you. And she said, as a musician, because Carlin's a musician, and she wants to hear from you what music you have, what music you've written, what music you're working on. So for the artists out there, send us your songs, send us your music. And Carlin will go through it. and every month she'll highlight a different artist. And you can find out how to sign up for that, again, at the very top of our show notes for this episode. And we'll be highlighting this program as we go through. And we're very thrilled and grateful to her for this great idea. The other thing we want to share, since we have a lot of work ahead of us, a lot of rebuilding, it's a new year, so I'm calling on all of you to join me in reading 2 books that are going to better equip us to do the work that these very difficult times are calling us to do. And those 2 books are Stacey Abrams' Lead from the Outside, How to Build Your Future and Make Real Change. And also, we're going to read Amanda Littman's Run for Something, a real talk guide to fixing the system yourself. Whether or not you plan to run for office, these are 2 books you must read because they're going to show you on how to stand up and do the work wherever you are, do the most good wherever you are, and own your power, realize how powerful you are. When we're going through difficult developing democracy crises that the United States is going through now, self-reliance becomes the name of the game. In Ukraine, one of the organizers of the revolution was a leader in a party called Self-Reliance. And so these 2 books are going to help us, show us how to be self-reliant. Because as we always say in Gaslit Nation, grassroots power is the most reliable power we have left. So let's read these 2 essential guides to learn how to own our power and how to help support the really good candidates, the public servants we need to clean up this democracy. Because as we're going to talk about today, we're up against traitors. We're in this slow motion coup, which is leading us to a slow motion civil war. And Trump and his goon squad, they're not going to be able to overturn this election. We don't think so, of course, but who knows? But I don't think they'll succeed. In the short term, I'm optimistic. But in the long term, you know what they're going to do. They're going to target the Secretary of States in the key states they need in order to win the Electoral College. They're going to try to elect their QAnon cult to those positions of power. They're going to try to elect their QAnon cult to the governor offices in these key states they need to win. So we really need to protect these offices. We need to flood the system with good men and women that believe in science, believe in truth. And the way we're going to do that is by reading books like Stacey Abrams' book, Lead from Outside, and Amanda Littman's book, Make Real Change and Run for Something. The more informed we are, the more vigilant we are, the better chance we stand in making the essential differences we need to make in order to protect our country from these traitors. And so speaking of traitors, we're going to be covering, hopefully, the defeat of David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler in Georgia tonight in a special bonus episode, which you can get by signing up at the Truth Teller level or higher on Patreon. My predictions for that, you may be listening to this show, this week's episode, after the fact, after the election results are out. So I'll just share what I think is going to happen. We'll see how that pans out. I think Ossoff stands a good chance of eking through. Perdue didn't show up to the debate, which made him look like a coward. Loeffler went full Carolyn Bryant Donham, the white woman who accused the 14-year-old black child, Emmett Till, of being sexually aggressive towards her. She's been making these horrific racist dog whistle allegations toward Warnock. According to Salon, Loeffler's campaign promoted a Facebook ad that darkened Reverend Warnock's skin and amplified this ad over another ad that did not darken his skin. She's also been just using all these racist tropes against him, as has been widely reported, and of course counts as among her supporters a KKK member, as Ossoff pointed out. The other thing to point out is that in helping amplify all of this racism and fascism is, of course, big tech. Mark Zuckerberg could be a Black Mirror episode. Here we have Judd Legum of the site Popular Information breaking down how Facebook is complicit in spreading Republican far-right hate and disinformation. Judd writes on Twitter, "I know it's Christmas Eve, but people should understand what's happening with Facebook ads and the Georgia Senate runoffs. These elections will determine the trajectory of American politics for the next 2 years. Facebook's conduct is indefensible. Follow along if interested. The story starts on December 17 after Facebook begins allowing political ads in Georgia. American Crossroads, a super PAC run by Karl Rove and financed by Mitch McConnell, starts running a brutally dishonest ad against Raphael Warnock. The American Crossroads ad tells Georgia voters on Facebook that Warnock said, quote, 'God damn America,' as if he was expressing his own views, but he wasn't. He was quoting Jeremiah Wright in a speech he delivered on 7/11/13. We tracked down the quote. Here's Warnock's full quote. Quote, 'extracted from its theological and rhetorical context and looped to the point of ad nauseum was the most provocative phrase, quote, "God damn America.' The ad claims this means Warnock repeated the same anti-American hate himself. False. It's really impossible to overstate just how dishonest this ad is. It's like Kelly Loeffler going on Fox News and saying, Jeremiah Wright said, God damn America, and then running an ad attacking Kelly Loeffler for saying, God damn America. Based on my Twitter thread on December 17, one of Facebook fact-checking partners evaluated the American Crossroads ad and came to the same conclusion. It misleads voters because it lacks context. It took them a while, but Facebook eventually removed the American Crossroads ads. Under Facebook's rules, politicians and parties can post false political ads, but super PACs cannot. But on December 20th, American Crossroads just reposted the exact same ad, dishonestly attacking Warnock, and Facebook approved it. American Crossroads quickly spent more than $8,000 on this ad that was previously removed and reached as many as 250,000 Georgia voters. I exposed what happened on Twitter, and after a delay of several hours, Facebook took down the duplicated ad. Removing the ad was what Facebook's policy required, but it was pretty disturbing that American Crossroads can just keep posting copies of the same ad. So I emailed Facebook this question, what's preventing American Crossroads from posting it again? No response. Then on December 22nd, American Crossroads posted another ad with the same false attack on Warnock. It was approved by Facebook again. This was a claim that was already removed twice by Facebook. I emailed Facebook yesterday at 10 a.m. about this ad and have received no response. This ad is still up, still active, and still misleading Georgia voters. It still violates Facebook's rules. Facebook does not appear to care. Facebook has 50,000 employees and had $21.4 billion in revenue in the third quarter of 2020. My newsletter, which is Popular Information, has 2 employees and $0 billion in revenue in the third quarter of 2020. But I seem to care more about this than Facebook. If you care to, check out my newsletter, Popular Information. Update, 8 hours later, these ads are still up. Haven't heard anything from Facebook. Update, this ad has finally been taken down. Merry Christmas. Good work, Judd. We'll see if Warnock manages to break through this massive disinformation, racist campaign led by Rove, McConnell, and Loeffler.
This year, our homes and our offices are now the same space. Maybe you have to deal with overhearing every one of your partner's conference calls. Or one of my friends was telling me the other day that they've been sitting in their car in the garage for some necessary alone time. We've all been dealing with even more stress than usual, and if any of these scenarios sound like you, it's a good idea to get support from a therapist to figure out how to find peace and quiet within yourself. Talkspace therapists give you the support you need to feel your best. Talkspace has thousands of licensed therapists trained in over 40 specialties, including anxiety, depression, relationships, and more. Your therapist can help you set and achieve your goals. I think you'll be amazed at how much progress you make each week that you attend therapy. An experienced therapist can give practical guidance that can really change your life for the better. At Talkspace, you can find the support that you need. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $100 off your first month with Talkspace. To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com or download the app. Make sure to use the code GASLIT to get $100 off of your first month and show your support for the show. That's Gaslit and Talkspace.com. So again, make sure you tune in tonight. We're going to give our instant reaction to this critical Georgia Senate race, which will, of course, be followed by the massive shit show of January 6th, which we're also going to do a special episode on. So this is a momentous week. And to just kind of set the stage, I think Andrea encapsulated very well the level of trauma that we as Americans are going through, that the world is going through as a result of COVID, as a result of rising autocracy, collapsed economies, but to just kind of lay out exactly how bad this is compared to previous times. We are now living through the worst pandemic in modern history, certainly the worst pandemic in the last century, the worst economy since the Great Depression, and it will probably be worse than that. The only reason I'm saying it's not is because it hasn't gone on as long. The worst hack of the US government in history, and that's the hack by Russia, which we really haven't heard a lot about since it first occurred, but it affected basically every governmental institution as well as a large number of private companies. And that attack, the cyber attack in America, is ongoing. We are living through an attempted coup. This is the first time that the president of the United States, after being soundly defeated, has refused to accept the election results and is using all sorts of tactics, including threats of violence, to try to maintain his position. And we're going to be talking about that all episode long. We have a brewing civil war as a result of the factions that have been inflamed by this treason and by these crimes. We have a brewing foreign war with Iran, which we're also going to talk to. We have an administration that serves organized crime, and that has been the case from the moment that Trump has stepped into office. And yes, it builds on the relationships of prior administrations, but this is still unprecedented in how blatant and how direct it is and how irrelevant they find the survival of the United States, which is an afterthought at best, and its destruction is a specific goal at worst. And of course, all of this is being led by a narcissistic sociopath who sees other human beings as disposable and has a lifelong obsession with using nukes. So that's where we are. So if you're feeling down, if you're feeling like this is just an incredibly tough time, it's because it truly is. I mean, we are dealing with a lot. So if you're even able to just get through your day, then, that's enough. If you're able to just hold on through this, that's enough. There have been a lot of people I've seen really hurting and, maybe psychoanalyzing it, but there are external factors that anyone who has a conscience, who loves people, cares about people, who values life, is going to be upset and traumatized by these times. And as Andrea said, the aftermath of that is going to linger for a while. So it's something that we should talk about more in the future. But for now, as I've been saying now for about 2 months, back to the coup. We still have a coup. We have some new coup developments. The big one this week is that the coup is now on tape. We had Trump pressuring Georgia's Republican Secretary of State, Brad Raffensperger, to, quote, find enough votes to overturn Biden's win in the election, repeatedly citing disproven claims of fraud and raising the prospect of, quote, criminal offense if officials did not change the vote count for Trump. And that is all on tape. That is something that you can and should listen to. Among the more notable lines of that conversation is Trump saying, all I want to do is this. I just want to find 11,780 votes, which is one more than we have, because we won the states. Here it's worth noting, Georgia counted its votes 3 times before certifying that Biden won by a 11,779 vote margin. So Raffensperger responded, President Trump, we've had several lawsuits and we've had to respond in court to the lawsuits and the contentions. We don't agree that you have won. And so, it's obviously very good that Raffensperger, sorry, I'm butchering his name here, is standing up to Trump, is being clear and consistent. This is the way that all officials should have been handling him from the very start. They have not. One thing, of course, that's worth mentioning is how similar this phone call is to what Trump deemed the perfect phone call with Ukraine's leader, Zelensky, which was also a shakedown in which Trump used the same mafia tactics of asking him for an illegal favor to sway an election and implying that Zelensky will be harmed if they do not grant Trump the favor. Like Zelensky and like others who Trump mentioned in that Ukraine call, most notably Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch, who he said was going to, quote, go through some things, Secretary of State Raffensperger has already been threatened. His wife has been threatened. His family has been threatened. And no one is doing anything to stop those threats. This has been the pattern of the past 5 years, as well as the pattern of Trump's entire life. The reason that little pundits keep saying that Trump is, quote, acting like a mafioso is because he is one. Trump is part of transnational organized crime. He has been working for transnational organized crime for his entire life. He is a career criminal. And we have, the archives of every episode of Gaslit Nation, as well as my book, Hiding in Plain Sight, to lay out the dirty details of that. But you've witnessed this. You've seen this in action. You've seen when other civil servants try to hold Trump criminal lackeys accountable, lackeys like Manafort and Stone and Flynn, they end up threatened. We've had judges threatened, juries threatened, whistleblowers threatened, congresspeople threatened, journalists threatened, and these threats were successful. And so now we're at the point where the individuals who hijacked our democracy, who have been using our treasury as their personal ATM, who have been trying to destroy our country from within with the help of a criminal network, with the help of the Kremlin and other hostile states, now they have been pardoned. So my question is, what does it mean now that Trump has pardoned all of these extremely dangerous individuals who have been working together in tandem, by the way, since the 1980s? What role might they be playing in the ongoing attempted coup? What role will others like Eric Prince and his war criminal mercenaries, also pardoned, the mercenaries, I mean, not Prince, what role will they play? So, Andrea, I'm sure you have some thoughts, especially on the pardoning of Manafort and others.
Yes, that was clearly expected. I said I've been prepared for the pardoning of Manafort since early 2017. I even wrote on Twitter that Manafort is going to go shooting his way out. He will never flip. And I was correct. And now here we are. So I've been emotionally prepared for this moment. Yeah, but I do want to say that as this slow-moving coup has been ongoing, I think it's extremely ominous that during this time, Boston Dynamics released a video of one of their robots dancing. Because coups succeed when you have the security forces on your side and the military. Trump does not have that. He started purging the Pentagon after he lost the election, and it was too late. It's just too late. He doesn't have that widespread force in order to stage a successful coup. When we do this work in studying authoritarianism, it's so obvious to us how all this is going to play out because it's the same dictator playbook. We've seen this in post-Soviet states. But what is always the unknown is the technology and the dystopian tech that they have in order to attack us and suppress us. And so I really feel that these knuckleheads that consume a lot of our attention, the Hawleys, the Cruzes, the Nuneses, they are a sideshow, in my opinion, to the larger issue of this robot soldier space race that is currently ongoing that hardly gets any attention. So when you see a dancing robot, I share the opinion of Jason Stanley, the author of How Fascism Works, The Politics of Us and Them, when he wrote in response to Boston Dynamics' terrifying robot machine, Siri, show me how a few tech oligarchs will control an increasingly impoverished mass of humanity eager to address massive inequality. Yeah, we're going to be old enough probably to see this robot force take hold somewhere in the world. It's coming because these robots keep getting more and more advanced. Another disturbing development we had over the holidays from the Washington Post, and I'm reading now from the Washington Post, the Secret Service took the unprecedented step of allowing the former detail leader to temporarily leave his job to become a White House political advisor. I want to repeat that again. A Secret Service agent became a White House political advisor to Trump. Anthony Ornato was hired as White House Deputy Chief of Staff earlier this year. In that role, he helped coordinate a controversial June photo opportunity in which Trump strode defiantly across Lafayette Square to pose with a Bible after the park was forcibly cleared of peaceful protesters. Ornato also helped coordinate numerous rallies across the country during the pandemic, per Trump's wishes. The mass gatherings were blamed for increasing the spread of the coronavirus in some of the communities where they took place, and left many in the ranks of the Secret Service infected or exposed. Ornato will be leaving the White House and is slated to return to the Secret Service to become the assistant director overseeing the agency's Raleigh Training Center, according to the people familiar with the changes, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to describe personnel decisions. The posting is prestigious, but outside of the president's immediate protection team. So again, you need the security forces, you need the military on your side to unleash a successful coup. What worries me is how we have this far-right strain in our country, the ideological heirs of the people that committed genocide against Native Americans and fought to uphold slavery, and they're going to learn from Trump's mistakes. As we keep saying, the next time one of these guys gets into the White House, they're going to go immediately for the military and security services and make sure it's packed with their cult in order to have a successful coup next time around.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, it's been frightening to see the Sedition Caucus taking hold, both for what it means that Republicans would blatantly embrace anti-constitutional actions in the service of a mobbed-up proto-dictator with overt alliances to hostile states, that they'd so easily abandon this country, its history, and its people. I mean, what it shows is just the field of disposability has expanded. That's been the lesson basically since the Reagan era, where people who are not white, Native Americans, Black Americans, many American immigrants, there's obviously a very long history of legalized persecution, of selective autocratic practices. And, white Americans would observe this. White immigrants would come to America and observe this and try as hard as they could to classify themselves as white, to get the protections of whiteness and to be immune from those sorts of discriminatory and, retaliatory actions. What we've seen recently is that pretty much everyone is viewed as disposable, except for an extremely narrow elite that constantly has to prove their fealty to a cult leader, and that the concept even of a nation state, of something, bringing us all together as Americans, which we've always had our differences, but that was something that I think, we took for granted, just that the United States would survive in some form as a cohesive unit. That's out the window. And I think that's one of the things that's kind of contributing to this sense of incredible trauma and incredible unease. It's like that saying, you can't go home again, amplified on a massive scale. A lot of us have been inside our houses, viewing the world through little doom screens on our phone, interacting less directly, with our communities. And then when we do go out into the world, we see those communities falling apart. We see businesses that are never coming back. We see schools that aren't in session. And so all of that happening because of COVID just lends this broader, purposeful agenda of the Republican Party to destroy this country. You can see how they would pull it off. You could see them exploiting that situation. And you also see how little this means to them, how little love for country that there is, love for our states, our landmarks, our schools, our community, our society. There's no lowering of the flag to commemorate, the victims, to lend moral support. They want to break that sense of cohesion entirely. And it's a very frightening thing to see. Trump is a wartime president, and the war is on the United States. And the war always was on the United States. And it's taken 4 years for people to realize that. But that is what we are living through. And I think that once people grasp that the intention is to destroy us from within, to destroy this country, to break it down, to sell it off for parts, it becomes less mysterious. And I hope that from that understanding, we have, the wherewithal and the determination to fight back. But my God, people are arriving at these realizations very late. And, I'm scared of what the next 48 hours will bring, much less the next few years. But the next 48 hours scare me quite a bit. So I have stuff to say on Iran, but do you have things to say about that?
Well, I think from being destroyed from within, I think we should cover the cyber Pearl Harbor.
Oh, yeah, go for it. One catastrophe at a time.
From the New York Times. On Election Day, General Paul M. Nakasone, the nation's top cyber warrior, reported that the battle against Russian interference in the presidential campaign had posted major successes and exposed the other side's online weapons, tools, and tradecraft. Quote, "We've broadened our operations and feel very good where we're at right now," he told journalists. 8 weeks later, General Nakasone and other American officials responsible for cybersecurity are now consumed by what they missed for at least 9 months, a hacking now believed to have affected upward of 250 federal agencies and businesses that Russia aimed not at the election system, but at the rest of the United States government and many large American corporations. 3 weeks after the intrusion came to light, American officials are still trying to understand whether what the Russians pulled off was simply an espionage operation inside the systems of the American bureaucracy or something more sinister, inserting backdoor access into government agencies, major corporations, the electric grid, and laboratories developing and transporting new generations of nuclear weapons. At a minimum, it has set off alarms about the vulnerability of government and private sector networks in the United States to attack and raised questions about how and why the nation's cyber defenses failed so spectacularly. Those questions have taken on particular urgency given that the breach was not detected by any of the government agencies that share responsibility for cyber defense. The Military Cyber Command and the National Security Agency, both of which are run by General Nakasone and the Department of Homeland Security, but by a private cybersecurity company, FireEye. quote, "This is looking much, much worse than I first feared," said Senator Mark Warner, Democrat of Virginia and the ranking member of the Senate Intelligence Committee. Quote, "The size of it keeps expanding. It's clear the United States government missed it." And if FireEye had not come forward, he added, "I'm not sure we would be fully aware of it to this day." Another quote from the New York Times, "We still don't know what Russia's strategic objectives were," said Suzanne Spalding, who was a senior cyber official at the Homeland Security Department during the Obama administration. Quote, "But we should be concerned that part of this may go beyond reconnaissance. Their goal may be to put themselves in a position to have leverage over the new administration, like holding a gun to our head to deter us from acting to counter Putin." I'm going to interject here because that is exactly what this is, Susan Spalding, and you sound exactly like an Obama official, which failed to stop Putin's attack on our democracy in 2016. Yes, a million times yes, the Kremlin has massively infiltrated our government and leading industries in order to put a gun to our head so Biden can't come in and meaningfully sanction the Kremlin for all of this is what it is.
No, I want to interject too, because when I hear, alleged experts say this, like, I feel like I'm losing my mind, because I wrote an article that came out in early 2018, I believe in January 2018, in Fast Company. And I think I read part of it on the bonus episode we did on the cyberattack, about how this may be the real leverage. The fact that Russia has hacked our infrastructure, the fact that Russia has hacked our power grid. We knew about that in 2018. What we have now is another attack, a much bigger, more expansive cyber attack. But they had already gotten into everything by 2016. And that was revealed by senators like John McCain during congressional testimony. And of course, we had all the previous hackings of the DOD, the State Department, the White House, the RNC, the DNC, and on and on and on. And so when these individuals are quoted as if this is some new battle that no one could have foreseen, or how did this happen? I mean, it's insane. And of course, we had Andy Greenberg, the author of Sandworm, on our show discussing all of this, discussing the potential for future attacks, discussing the predecessor attacks in places like Ukraine, as well as, ones that had taken place in the United States before. So yes, this is incredible leverage. It's leverage over any administration. But when you know that Trump is aligned with the Kremlin, and that, Biden will allegedly be inaugurated in about 2.5 weeks, this is something we all need to keep in mind. And anyway, go on.
A great book we also had on the show, David Scheimer, the author of Rigged: America, Russia, and 100 Years of Covert Electoral Interference. That breaks down in excruciating detail. Excruciating because it's like a Veep episode of how the Obama administration failed to protect us from the Kremlin's attack on our democracy. And so you have to read this book. Yes. And plus, also in November 2016, when Sarah and I were first getting to know each other, and we were constantly on the phone, and our husbands were like, "What is this new relationship that's taking over your life?" We were talking all the time about the gun the Kremlin had to our heads. We knew, we're like, okay, this wasn't just election hacking. They must be in the grid. What does this mean for air traffic control and aviation in America? Like, what kind of terrorism, what kind of ticking time bombs has the Kremlin planted across our country through cyber warfare? So we were onto this in the very early days. And that matters, because if we can figure it out, why the hell didn't the people in charge of protecting us figure it out?
Yeah, the only thing that we came up with at the time was, they don't want to tell us about it, because we basically saw a enormous humanitarian catastrophe looming with Trump. We knew that if Trump were to remain president, there was going to be mass death. And now there has been mass death. And we knew that we were going to lose control of our institutions to organized crime and hostile states. And we have. And the only thing we thought of is, what's worse than that eventual fate? It would be an immediate fate. It would be something like the grid going down right away in the fall of 2016. And that being something that potentially they could be holding over the heads of all the institutions that should be protecting American people from this, because we just could not figure out. I mean, it was just the most obvious plot. And it was a plot that people had confessed to. And it was a plot that experts were like, yes, this has indeed happened. Russia has permeated our grid. Cybersecurity experts were already looking at it. It just wasn't discussed. It was one of those big topics. Another one, of course, was Jeffrey Epstein in his operation. It's like the media just wouldn't broach it. Our government officials wouldn't broach it. And I think it's because it shows either incompetence at best or complicity at worst, because we, of course, know, and I think this is certainly true of the Trump administration, that they left the door open. Trump welcomes these kind of hacks, these kind of cyber attacks, if they come from one of his partner states. He does not care if this country collapses. He cares only about, as I've said many times, his money, his power, and his immunity from prosecution. And whatever happens to this country or the people who live in it is irrelevant to him. So if some form of leverage is gathered by the hostile states that are using him for their own aims, then, he's fine with it. And so that was an immediate danger, that he would remain in office for 4 years. And, at this point, there is no explaining the lack of action from the FBI, the CIA, Mueller, Comey, the House Intelligence Committee. Take your pick. Everybody who was supposed to enforce accountability and protect us has failed. And there is no way that they failed from ignorance. They absolutely knew this. They knew this in the same way that Andrea and I knew it, and they know it in the same way that you know it. If you've been listening to our show, or from the myriad of experts who've been examining this and expressing their concerns. This information is not out floating in a vacuum or a void. It is not hard to find. We often see the criminals themselves confessing to the crimes or threatening the crimes and then making good on those threats. So you have to ask, what exactly are our institutions doing? Why are they so willing to abet this phenomenal failure that has led to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of Americans, with more to come? And they just seem to feel nothing. They seem to feel nothing, no loss. It's as if it's expected. I mean, a lot of this, as I was saying to you privately earlier, debating whether I should say this publicly, it reminds me of the end of the Soviet Union. It reminds me of that kind of choreographed destruction, where, of course, you saw the USSR struggling with internal conflicts and tragedies, whether Chernobyl or the war with Afghanistan, or just a general breakdown within the Politburo, within the Kremlin, often abetted by a gerontocracy, as we have in the United States, where we have very old, out-of-touch people ruling. And then, you see it fall apart with Gorbachev as this figure that sort of, smooths that process out. And then the oligarchs and Western plutocrats go in for the kill. They strip it down. They steal the resources. And what happens to the individuals of the states that stayed authoritarian? Because, of course, not every republic of the former Soviet Union ended up meeting the same fate. There are many that embraced democracy, state like Estonia, Lithuania, Ukraine, has been struggling for democracy, and others that stayed totalitarian in the case of Uzbekistan, or just strongly authoritarian in the case of Russia. But the commonality for the, authoritarian group is that what happened to the people was absolutely irrelevant to the ruling elite. It was a very, very narrow segment of society that was allowed to prosper and even allowed to really survive. And that's the direction I see us headed. And I don't see the kind of reaction from people in our institutions, the proper sense of alarm. I see a lack of surprise from them, and a kind of like, yeah, let's just further this thing along. Like, that's the vibe I'm getting. I mean, we do see flickering signs of life every now and again, but even those signs are somewhat suspicious. Like when it's Dick Cheney, leading the blowback against the authoritarian state. Like, honestly, I'm suspicious. There, I'm referencing the letter from all prior Secretary of Defense, people who held that position, that have written an open letter to Trump saying that the military should not be involved in the election process. Like, I'm not actually reassured that that's coming from Dick Cheney, because this has been a continuum. This has been a very long decline, and Trump was its culmination. That election was its culmination, and now we've been living in the aftermath of that. We've been talking about the attempted coup of 2020, but we've been living in the aftermath of the coup of 2016, a coup which people failed to acknowledge had occurred, a threat which people just thought they could close their eyes or look the other way, a threat in which many, many people were complicit. I think more than many of us want to admit, or many of you want to admit. I want to admit it just fine. But anyway, go on with what you're saying.
Oh, there's more. Back to the New York Times. Their sources said they worried about delicate but unclassified data the hackers might have taken from victims like the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, including Black Start, the detailed technical blueprints for how the United States plans to restore power in the event of a cataclysmic blackout. The plans would give Russia a hit list of systems to target to keep power from being restored in an attack like the one it pulled off in Ukraine in 2015, shutting off power for 6 hours in the dead of winter. Moscow, long ago, implanted malware in the American electric grid, and the United States has done the same to Russia as a deterrent. All right, so now this is the best part of this article in the New York Times, which you can find in our show notes for this episode, which is available for free on our public Patreon page, where we publish every weekly episode. Are you ready for this? Everyone lean in close to make sure you hear this, understand it, and tell everyone you know about this. From the New York Times. Employees say that under Kevin B. Thompson, the CEO of SolarWinds, which is the ground zero of this attack, Thompson is an accountant by training and a former chief financial officer. Every part of the business was examined for cost savings, and common security practices were eschewed because of their expense. His approach helped almost triple SolarWinds' annual profit margins to more than $453 million in 2019 from $152 million in 2010. Did you all get that? America, our entire country, our federal agencies, leading industries, God knows what else, because this is a massive attack that's going to take years to fully understand and to undo. It was the ground zero of this whole operation from the Kremlin was helped by the greed of the CEO of the company who chose profits, the almighty dollar, over cybersecurity. And the article goes on to explain the only reason why this asshole caught up and started doing some major security implementations was because European countries passed a regulation which required those measures. So if you want to know why the Kremlin, along with their proxies like Nigel Farage in the UK and in other places, are going after the EU and trying to break up the EU, it's because the EU is such an effective regulatory body. It forces through regulations, reforms, and accountability. That's why all the bad guys want to destroy it. So don't forget that. That's an important takeaway from this horrific story as well. So I just want to stress this again. American greed, which has been weakening our country since the Reagan Revolution. American greed left us vulnerable to this sweeping and potentially devastating attack by a foreign adversary. Once again, America's out-of-control culture of greed and corporate profits over safety and human life is making us increasingly vulnerable. It's destroying our country from within. From Trump's Republican Party to the NRA to big tech, American greed keeps letting the Kremlin come right in.
Yep. And I just have one more thing to say about this. And again, I believe I noted this in the Patreon episode we did previously, is that the timing of this hacking is very interesting, that they're saying that it began in earnest in March, 9 months ago, which is, of course, right when everything began to shut down because of COVID, and our work activity, our school activity, any kind of in-person meetup that we may have had moved online, where that information could be tracked, where it could be recorded, where, for example, if you're some sort of hostile data mining entity, you are suddenly given incredible access into the interior life of American citizens. And I don't know if that's just a coincidence. I do know, though, that it's a national security threat. I mean, it's a really serious and terrible problem. And the fact that we basically don't have a government at the moment, this horrific, endless transition period that has led us with, no oversight, no one really even attempting to step up and fill the void and tell us what's going on. It worries me a great deal because I don't know, what position we're going to be in once we find out the full extent of this cyber attack. Maybe we won't be able to tell each other about it because the grid will be down. But anyway, did you have any more on that, or shall we move on to Iran?
Yeah, move on. Well,
it's all connected. It's all one big giant.
The next theater, the other theater of World War III. Go on.
It's unbelievable. It's, we've been talking about all these crises, often discreetly for a number of years, and they're just intertwining into one giant week of hell. So we have been talking about war with Iran for a long time because all of Trump's friends really, really want it. Pretty much everybody who's been appointed into this administration wants it. Trump may want it less, I think, than others, but nonetheless, he's amenable. And of course, we started talking about this much more in depth with the assassination of Qasem Soleimani 1 year ago. So we're in that anniversary week of, one of their most prominent military figures being killed. And then, we've been waiting for some kind of retaliation from Iran, and also the exploitation of the potential of retaliation from Iran. And it's that exploitation that I am worried about most right now as Trump seeks to hold on to power. And so tensions between Iran and the United States are very high. There have been a number of verbal threats back and forth. We've also seen the U.S. Sending its warships back to the vicinity of Iran. Iran has retaliated by seizing a South Korean tanker, saying that this was in response to U.S. sanctions. They also have blamed the recent assassination of its leading nuclear scientist on Israel, and have accused Israel of trying to incite a war between the U.S. and Iran. On Saturday, Iranian Foreign Minister Mohammad Javad Zarif said on Twitter, "New intelligence from Iraq indicates the Israeli agent provocateurs are plotting attacks against Americans, putting an outgoing President Donald Trump in a bind with a fake casus belli." So basically, what Zarif is saying is that Israel is going to attack the United States and then blame it on Iran so that Trump has a pretext to then strike Iran. And Israeli officials have denied these allegations. However, this is something I could see happening, and it doesn't require Israel's participation for Trump and his backers to do it. To some extent, the Israel factor is neither here nor there, though it is worth noting the incredibly close relationship between indicted criminal Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Trump's criminal son-in-law, Jared Kushner. This is a relationship that stretches back decades, and I've documented it in my book, Hiding in Plain Sight. Kushner, of course, is implicated not only in Israeli politics, financially and as a holder of West Bank settlement properties, but has been implicated in a number of Middle Eastern plots with Qatar, who paid off his debt for 666 Fifth Avenue, and of course with Saudi Arabia and his close ties with fellow murderous millennial MBS. So, you have to ask yourself, well, what has Kushner been doing over there in Israel, where they're naming things after him, where they're lavishing praise on him? And we know, of course, that Netanyahu is among the many people who want this war with Iran and have wanted it for a long time and have wanted the U.S. to do it for Israel. We also have Pompeo, a longtime Iran war hawk. He wants this war in Iran. He's been spending a lot of time over in the Middle East. It's not looking good. A lot of people, experts on Middle Eastern policy, on nuclear warfare, have been expressing grave concerns that Trump may use this final remaining time in office, God willing, to create a war in Iran. I'm just hoping this is really, truly his last few weeks in office. My God, just that sounds so good. Anyway, though, we're worried he's going to blow up the world before he goes. And there's some other disturbing Middle Eastern developments, which I think are kind of going under the radar. Last week, we saw Sheldon Adelson, who is the biggest donor to the GOP, flying convicted spy for Israel, the American Jonathan Pollard, to Israel on his private plane. And upon arrival, Pollard was greeted very enthusiastically by Netanyahu. This is how spies are always greeted. You could see this with Robert Maxwell, the father of Ghislaine Maxwell, Jeffrey Epstein's partner, who got a giant lavish funeral in Israel for being a secret Mossad agent his whole life. Anyway, so this development was only made possible by Trump taking Pollard, a dangerous traitor, off of his parole and allowing him to leave the country. Again, I think this is something that Kushner probably was involved in. We've seen a number of these pardons and arrangements not come from Trump's own mind, but from advisors from Kushner, sometimes from John Bolton. That's who got Scooter Libby out. Adelson has made clear that his own loyalty lies to Israel and not the US. And that's not my opinion. This is just something he's literally said. He said he regretted serving in the US military instead of the Israeli military. He said he hopes his sons serve for the IDF instead of for the United States. And he said, and this is a full direct quote, "All we care about is being good Zionists, being good citizens of Israel, because even though I'm not Israeli born, Israel is in my heart." And we'll put a link to the video of him saying that in the show notes. And so those are very dangerous things for the leading donor to the GOP to say, especially one who basically purchased himself a Sheldon Adelson branded embassy in Jerusalem and who is backing a traitorous, mobbed up administration and now is lending his private plane to a convicted spy who is running around full of American state secrets. And, everyone is welcome to their political opinions. It's not against the law to prefer another country over the United States, but you clearly don't want somebody who does that to be the main funder of an American political party. Like, I can't even begin to describe how bad and disturbing this is. And we've seen this happen with many of our prominent political figures. You obviously have Trump and his predilection toward Russia. You've had the Bush family and their predilection to Saudi Arabia. We have Pelosi outright saying that if the Capitol crumbles, her fundamental concern will be aiding and working with Israel, not American death. Not the demise of our country, because, newsflash for Pelosi, the Capitol is crumbling, but Israel. And so, as I said before, this is not about Israel per se. It's about a lack of commitment towards the well-being of American citizens and the national security of America. There are many, many, many countries that are wrapped up in this horrific morass, and they are working together. You are seeing the worst, most autocratic elements of every country that the Trump administration works with working together. Putin, MBS, Netanyahu, and on and on and on. And of course, you're also seeing people protesting them. There have been protests against Netanyahu now for like half a year. And it really would be a boon to the world if those protests succeed. But anyway, that is very disturbing. It's just another symptom of this broader disease where you're seeing transnational organized crime, oligarchs and plutocrats, and spies just, living in a world of total impunity, elite criminal impunity. And it's bringing down our countries. It's bringing down our societies. It's making it more difficult for people to tackle everyday problems. And everyday problems nowadays consist of things like, how do we get a vaccine to the people? How do we have a baseline functional government and representatives we can contact, when things are going poorly for us? I hope that there is radical change with this new administration. I don't think anyone associates Joe Biden with radical change, but I hope that they confront directly what has been done to our country, the gutting of its institutions, the loss of expectation of baseline loyalty, that we are all living here. And of course, we don't all think the same things. Of course, we're not all going to agree with each other. Like, that's normal. That's healthy. When everyone agrees with each other on everything, that's a sign that you're living in a dictatorship. But this whole thing of, let's have our foremost loyalty to a country, maybe be the United States, maybe be something else, maybe be Russia, maybe be Israel, maybe be China. I mean, that's not great. That's why the Republicans do this, by the way. That's why they're constantly accusing Democrats of having some weird loyalty to China, fixation on China. All that is projection, because that's what they've been doing. They've been taking dark money from autocratic regimes, having it, get into their campaigns through proxies like the NRA and other groups. And it has eroded any semblance of public service, any semblance of commitment and loyalty and patriotism to our country. And it's just absolutely shameful. When you look and you see all the people who have suffered and fought for our democracy, both abroad and from within, and how cavalierly they throw this all away, these seditious Republicans, it's just disgusting.
Yes. And speaking of the global virus of far-right authoritarianism, Josh Hawley and this stunt that he's doing to further his career, to basically kiss the ring of Trumpism, it reminds me so much of the Trumpian far-right government in Poland, which gives us an idea of where we may be headed in 2024 and 2028. In Poland, you have this handsomely boyish young president who is seen as a puppet for the old conspiracy theorist narcissist who runs the party and is the puppet master. And this whole movement in Poland, under this far-right government, has purged state media, turned it into a propaganda weapon, packed the courts, attacked LGBTQ people, attacked immigrants. Last time I was in Warsaw in 2019, a Ukrainian independent journalist told me that for the first time she didn't feel safe in Poland because the viciousness against immigrants, against anybody who's typically treated as a scapegoat, they're under threat in Poland. And the latest is this constitutional court that's largely seen as illegitimate did an outright ban, essentially an outright ban on abortion rights in Poland. And of course, when you attack abortion rights, you're basically trying to shove women back into the home, trying to take away women's freedom and autonomy. And it's been this horrible boiling pot of growing dangers against democracy in Poland. And I could very much see us headed there, where you have Josh Hawley, who was educated at Stanford University and Yale Law School. He taught at the prestigious St. Paul's School in London. This guy, according to his education, should know better. And instead, he's going to challenge the constitutional right to have these election results certified on January 6th. And he's, of course, doing this, and Ted Cruz is doing this because they see how much golf Donald Trump plays. They see how much time Donald Trump spends on Twitter. They know he's not a reader. Trump does not like to read or pay attention to things. He doesn't like the actual work of being president. He likes the power. He likes the immunity, but he doesn't really like being president. And so what they're betting on is that Trump's going to finally go out to Florida, Mar-a-Lago, and stay there and spend 4 years golfing, realize that Biden and Pelosi don't have the spine to go after him and his crime syndicate, and life after the White House isn't so bad. But he's still going to be the puppet master of the Republican Party. It's now his Republican Party. He's completely cannibalized it. And all of the corruption from George W. Bush's justices on the Supreme Court, giving us Citizens United and gutting the Voting Rights Act, all of that corruption by the quote-unquote establishment Republican Party gave birth to Trumpism. It was the ultimate outcome of when you chip away at our democracy, when you allow dark money, including foreign money, to flood our elections. What do you think you're going to get? You're going to get Donald Trump as president of the United States, and we're likely going to see a Senator Ivanka Trump, because she, as has been rumored, as has been reported, is allegedly going after Mark Rubio's seat as U.S. Senator in Florida in 2022. So Hawley, this is just careerism. And if you're wondering how dictatorships work, well, congratulations, America. You get an inside look now. And this is what it is. It's just rule of law gets steamrolled. And in its place, you have a culture of corruption, which is essentially an industry of corruption, where it's not about the rule of law and following norms and good governance. What you have instead is might makes right. And Trump bullied his way into power with the help of a mass-murdering, terrorist, xenophobic regime, the Kremlin. And he's in charge now of the party. And if you want to get into power, if you want to move up the ranks in a authoritarian system, and that's what the Republican Party is, it's an authoritarian system, then you've got to kiss the ring of the top dog. And Trump is going to remain the top dog. And it's really scary now because, as I said at the start of the show, they're going to try to do a smarter coup next time. They're going to learn from this. And that is why we all must stay engaged and vigilant and check out the Gaslit Nation Action Guide and just commit yourself to some action items there, because it's an all hands on deck time in our nation's history for the foreseeable future, because this is not going to go away anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah, just a few thoughts on Hawley, because Hawley, of course, is my senator, because I live in Missouri. The greatest takedown of Hawley comes from Lindsey Simmons, who you should follow on Twitter. She's a fellow Missourian who ran for Congress, and I wish she'd won. She's a Democrat, and she's somebody who intimately knows this situation. And, it's been weird for us in Missouri to see how Hawley is presented by the national media and kind of like upheld on a national stage, because he's known here just as such a phony, like such a hypocrite. Just, very early in his campaign, there are just these little things like he wanted to debate McCaskill on a flatbed truck and he didn't know what that was. He was trying to pretend to be, this rural down home guy, doesn't even own a home here. He called St. Louis bread company Panera. Just a lot of indicators that Josh Hawley was DC bound, that he had no particular attachment to Missouri, that he was using this, just as a way to kind of market himself to the Trump base. But one of the more interesting elements of his career was how he dealt with Eric Greitens, who's just like him. Eric Greitens is my former governor, who was indicted for, among other things, tying up a half-naked woman in his basement and photographing her and threatening to blackmail her with the photos. He also got in trouble for illicit use of apps that deleted information, for taking money from a veterans campaign fund. I mean, the list of crimes goes on. And so what happened was, there was a call for, from the Missouri GOP as well as from the Democrats for Greitens to leave. And when this was playing out throughout 2018, I basically saw this as the future with Trump. And I was watching very warily because despite, having a mugshot and being arrested and all this, Greitens was just not stepping down. So we had this criminal governor just sitting there. Hawley at that time was the attorney general, and he broke away from Greitens. He has a good sense of these internal fractures within the Republican Party. And eventually Greitens did leave. He, of course, then was not held accountable for any of his crimes, because this is Missouri, where, quid pro quo corruption is, hardly even investigated. So, even the most blatant offenses are ones that you tend to be able to buy your way out of. So it's been interesting watching Hawley throw down with the Trump camp. He's obviously thinking that that's going to be the winning side. You see other Republicans, throwing down with, I guess, ostensibly the Constitution, which is the opposite of the Trump camp. I could see a future where Hawley flip-flops around. He's already bamboozled a bunch of leftists. All of these leftists seem to be the sons and daughters of like Wall Street brokers. I'm just sort of noticing this. It's like Matt Stoller. They're like, oh, Josh Hawley, man of the people, because Hawley will occasionally do, what's basically a sensible political move, like push for the $2,000 COVID aid, and of course that's the right thing to do. He's not doing it because he cares about anybody's welfare. He's doing it because he's trying to climb that ladder, and he knows how easy it is to trick people. So I encourage people to read up more on Missouri politics, because you'll understand the kind of breeding ground for Josh Hawley, mega NRA money recipient Josh Hawley, given at CPAC, I believe, I don't know if he was subpoenaed. I don't know. He's had quite a run. So follow Lindsey Simmons. That's what I would advise for now. And definitely do not buy into national media narratives about this guy, because they pay no attention to our state, its politics, its political culture. And he's very good at deceiving people in that fashion. Anyway, there was one more thing I wanted to say, kind of going back to Iran, and this also ties into Hawley, because all these things are working together. Today is January 5th. Tomorrow is January 6th, the day of hell, the day we've all been dreaded. And that's because it's the day that Trump is going to try to cling to power with the help of seditious Republicans like Hawley and those joining him. But there's also the possibility that he will seek some kind of pretext to declare a national emergency. And that's kind of the point I wanted to get to with Iran, is that there are two things going on here. On one hand, you see people who really do want a war with Iran and have wanted a war with Iran for a long time. On the other side, you see Trump wanting an excuse to, declare that he needs to stay in power because the country is being threatened. We've already been threatened by a massive cyber attack, but I guess since that's Russia, that one doesn't qualify. I'm worried that there's going to be some kind of attack, and he's going to blame Iran or Antifa, or Iran and Antifa working together. It doesn't need to make sense. You need to understand that. Like, the facts don't matter. The logic doesn't matter. It's the raw application of power that Trump is relying on and has always relied on in order to maintain his position. And I think that this may be one of the reasons that this letter from the Secretaries of Defense came out, saying that the military wouldn't be involved. What that actually entails, I don't know. I don't want a military coup in our country, by which I mean the military taking over the functions of government. That's not something to strive for, but I'm not sure whether this letter was meant to convey that the military is not going to help Trump in his illegal activities, or whether the military isn't going to stop Trump from carrying out his illegal activities of staying in power when he is not, in fact, the president-elect. So there's just a lot of frightening stuff on the horizon. I think if this doesn't happen on January 6th, it is unfortunately possible that it could happen before Biden's inauguration, or, hopefully none of this will happen at all. Hopefully, Andrea and I will finally be wrong, and things will begin to improve, and things will begin to settle down. But geez, it's not looking good. On top of all of this, one final thing about the 6th, then I'll get your views on it. The Proud Boys are heading to DC to protest on behalf of Trump. You also see some people from QAnon who want to join in on this, some other militant groups coming. Trump is encouraging them. He's being extremely explicit about this. We're seeing posts from people who are treating this like a military battle, saying they're ready to die for Trump in DC, which is extraordinarily sad. There's been a lot of debate about, what should people do? Because we know that, one, Trump just wants mass violence, and he wants mass death, and he also wants to use that chaos as a ladder to maintain power. So if you have a counter protest, for example, that could, give him the excuse he needs. On the other hand, Trump will invent an excuse if there's no counter protest. So those who want to go out and punch Nazis, I say go out and punch Nazis if that's what you want to do. But just be aware that this protest, I think, may be different than ones we've seen in the past, even more dangerous than Charlottesville. There's no bottom here. I could easily see Trump doing something like Tiananmen Square or the Andijan massacre. I have great admiration for those protesters who are trying to protect the types of places and people that groups like the Proud Boys attack, like Black churches, for example, which are often desecrated when these groups come to town. So a lot of people are just trying to protect their fellow Americans. And I think that's something that should always be praised. But it's a complicated decision, I think, on what to do here because the stakes are higher. And I think the odds of mass violence are much more than they've been in previous events. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with you. We're up against traitors, and they're being helped by big tech and American greed and the consolidation of far-right media. And it's not going to go away when Biden gets sworn in office. We're going to feel these tremors and they're going to explode around every election cycle. So unless we reform the systems that empower them, including abolishing the Electoral College, which is what Hawley is banking on, being from a historically, at least at one time, a bellwether state like Missouri, or being the senator of that state currently. I think he thinks that he's the guy that can peel off Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan from the Democrats. We need to confront these systems that keep us vulnerable. That's it. And it's going to be generational work. And we plant our seeds. And the more work we do, the easier we make it for those who come after us to go further. And that's how we win. And if you think about the giants, the shoulders that we stand on, like John Lewis and all these tremendous Americans that moved our country forward, primarily people of color who have made America freer, fairer, we owe it to them. They faced greater violence. The civil rights movement was up against fiery battles by police, by white mobs. That was unleashed white rage, blood in the streets. We saw that again and again for many generations. So it's just another chapter of that. And the fight is getting easier. And you have to think in terms of decades if you're looking for hope. Things are changing for the better, but it's going to take work to keep changing it. And this work falls on us now. And it would be a great disservice for us not to do our part in this much longer generational struggle. And that's what we're all being called to do. And let that set your hair on fire in the best possible way and find the excitement in it and find the community in it and find your inner power in it and just plant your seeds and then trust that they're going to grow and do beautiful things long after we're all gone. So I do want to talk about the latest news in the Neo-Confederacy, a regular section we should do called Traitors and Patriots. Dozens of Confederate monuments have been removed in recent years, but several have gone up, at least in spirit. We have Trump just throwing out the Medal of Freedom. According to the White House website, established by President John F. Kennedy in 1963, this prestigious award is the nation's highest civilian honor. It is awarded by the President of the United States to individuals who have made exceptional contributions to the security or national interests of America, to world peace, or to cultural or other significant public or private endeavors. So who does Trump give the Medal of Freedom to? The creator of the Big Mac? Just kidding. But I wouldn't be surprised. He gave the Medal of Freedom to far-right radio host and hate monger Rush Limbaugh, his attack dog. And then he gave it to another attack dog, Devin Nunes, who obsessively harassed my sister, Alexandra Chalupa, the independent contractor who warned Democrats and Republicans that the Kremlin was attacking our democracy through Putin's operative, Paul Manafort. She was right. She was proven right. And Nunes could not keep my sister's name out of his mouth all through the impeachment hearings. As we saw, it was horrific. She's a mom of 3, and he's a disgusting human being who put her life at risk. And he gets the Medal of Freedom from Trump. And then also, it was reported, it was shared by Representative Eric Swalwell, who wrote on Twitter, Bannon and Devin Nunes in cahoots in Russia investigation, and I can finally share it with you. And Bannon wanted to lie about it. And then Swalwell goes on to share an excerpt of the House Intel Russia transcripts. So basically, according to this member of Congress, Devin Nunes was coordinating with white supremacist Steve Bannon. And finally, Trump awards yet another attack dog, because this guy is the mob boss of the crime syndicate that is the Republican Party. Representative Jim Jordan, who's accused by several former Ohio State wrestlers for knowing and being told directly that several wrestlers were being sexually abused by the team doctor, Richard Strauss. Jordan is accused of doing nothing in response to this, allowing the abuse to go on. Strauss was accused of sexually abusing 177 male student patients at Ohio State. So 3 white men who protect and further the interests of Donald Trump, a white supremacist leader whose rhetoric has incited hate crimes, including the shooting of mosques and a synagogue, and violence by stormtroopers, the Proud Boys, essentially put up 3 neo-Confederate monuments by degrading the Presidential Medal of Freedom by giving it to 3 fellow white supremacists. This leads me to this great documentary that you all should watch about Grant. I really do mean it.
I knew it was going to do that. Sorry. Go on.
If you need a shot of courage, watch this documentary. I'm going to read now from a letter that U.S. Grant sent his father on April 21st, 1861, when the Civil War just broke out. And it very much sums up what we're up against. Dear Father, we are now in the midst of trying times when everyone must be for or against his country and show his colors too, by his every act. Having been educated for such an emergency at the expense of the government, I feel that it has upon me superior claims, such claims as no ordinary motives of self-interest can surmount. I do not wish to act hastily or unadvisedly in the matter, and as there are more than enough to respond to the first call of the president, I have not yet offered myself. I have promised, and I'm giving all the assistance I can in organizing the company whose services have been accepted from this place. I have promised further to go with them to the state capitol, and if I can be of service to the governor in organizing his state troops to do so. What I ask now is your approval of the course I am taking, or advice in the matter. A letter written this week will reach me in Springfield. I have not time to write to you but a hasty line, for, though Sunday as it is, we are all busy here. In a few minutes, I shall be engaged in directing tailors in the style and trim of uniform for our men. Whatever may have been my political opinions before, I have but one sentiment now. That is, we have a government, and laws and a flag, and they must all be sustained. There are but 2 parties now, traitors and patriots, and I want hereafter to be ranked with the latter, and I trust the stronger party. I do not know, but you may be placed in an awkward position, and a dangerous one. But cost cannot now be counted. My advice would be to leave where you are if you are not safe with the views you entertain. I would never stultify my opinion for the sake of a little security. All right. Yours truly, U.S. Grant. This is what we're up against, a slow-motion coup leading us to a slow-motion civil war.
Our discussion continues, and you can get access to that by signing up on our Patreon at the Truth Teller level or higher.
We want to encourage you to donate to your local food bank, which is experiencing a spike in demand due to the coronavirus crisis. We also would like to share our deepest condolences to Representative Jamie Raskin and his family on the death of his son, Tommy Raskin, an activist who fought for human rights and animal rights. We encourage you to donate to the Tommy Raskin Memorial Fund for People and Animals, which we have linked to on our Patreon page.
We also encourage you to donate to the International Rescue Committee, a humanitarian relief organization helping refugees from Syria. Donate at rescue.org. And if you want to help critically endangered orangutans already under pressure from the palm oil industry, donate to the Orangutan Project at theorangutanproject.org. Gaslit Nation is produced by Sarah Kenzier and Andrea Chalupa. If you like what we do, leave us a review on iTunes. It helps us reach more listeners. And check out our Patreon. It keeps us going. And you can also subscribe to us on YouTube.
Our production managers are Nicholas Torres and Carlin Daigle. Our episodes are edited by Nicholas Torres, and our Patreon exclusive content is edited by Carlin Daigle.
Original music in Gaslit Nation is produced by David Whitehead, Martin Vissenberg, Nick Farr, Damian Arriaga, and Carlin Daigle.
Our logo design was donated to us by Hamish Smith of the New York-based firm Order. Thank you so much, Hamish.
Gaslit Nation would like to thank our supporters at the producer level on Patreon and higher: Joel Farron,
Larry Gasson,
Erica Moore,
Karen A. Deal,
Nico Phillips,
Brian E. Castor,
Lex Reed,
Melissa Howland,
Karen Heisler,
Jordan Sanders,
Persis Levy,
Ann Bertino,
Chris Bravo,
Stephanie Brandt MD,
Mark Snaggs Alexander,
Rachel Winder,
Stephanie K. Reasoner,
T.R. Dunstan,
Kim,
John Millett,
Michael Finn,
Chris Ash,
Lacey W. Brightside Counseling,
Kike,
David East,
Shannon Nacy,
Ida,
Chris Fellow,
Dodie Pop,
Kristen Bredemus,
Suzanne McFadden,
Gabriel R.,
Ben Wheaton,
Joseph Mara Jr.,
Amy Timon,
Michelle Swearingen,
Rich Holcomb,
Sean McDonald,
Jeremy Thompson,
Thomas Scheibe,
Kelsey Malsum,
Julie Matthews,
Peggy Lucas,
Mark,
Barbara Kittredge,
Rip and Row,
Matthew Womack,
Brittany Keener,
Loretta Carroll Strong,
Sean Berg,
Daniel Passaretti,
Kristen Custer,
Benjamin Galuza,
Allison Marino,
Kai Gillis,
Sharon Hattrick,
Ed Reynolds,
Irv Robinson,
Keith Gottschalk,
William Barry Reeves,
Janet Robinson,
John Atrisk,
Richard Smith,
Emmy,
Kevin Gannon,
Sandra Collins,
Michael Steineff,
Lindsay Eggleston,
Pamela Newport,
Oliver Ash,
Wren,
Kat Cooper,
Katie Masuris,
John Laughlin,
Charles Othier,
Ryan Byrne,
David Boudreau,
Jeff Thompson,
C. Baker,
Evan Rosemore,
Chip Salzenberg,
Ray Alba,
Heather Sharma,
Leo Chalupa,
Adam Ingersoll,
Carl Hosier,
Carol Golstead,
Michael Wooldridge,
Greg Kreimer,
Mandy Farapur,
Fontaine Carpenter,
Jason Benke,
Louis Mitchell,
Marcus J. Trent,
Joe Darcy,
Ann Marshall,
Sheila Humphreys,
Jeremy Lewis,
Joel Newman,
Victoria Nordgren,
Sonny McKee,
Solomon Hikes,
George Hughes,
Trigve,
Larry Colwell,
Christine Morgan,
D.L. Singfield,
Matt Perez,
James Silverman,
Doug Friedenberg,
Nicole Spear,
Ted Gary Mitchell,
Alexandria Lane Detweiler,
Carolyn Friend,
Mike B. Matherin,
Kelly Ranson,
Stephanie Brandt MD,
Thomas Burns,
Brian Tajuden,
Gustav Halsby,
Christy Vitale,
Adam Levine,
Maureen Murphy,
Michelle Dash,
Jans Alstrup Rasmussen, Zachary
Lemon,
Dorothy Kamerick,
Gordon Shumway,
Donna Jaffe,
Victoria Olson,
Alabama,
A.W. Nicholson,
John Dambro,
Jason Rita,
Joanna Markson,
Henrik Bramius,
Margaret Moe,
Matthew Copeland,
Alan Liu,
Brian Collins,
Lisa LaFlame,
Paige Harrington,
Kevin Fearon,
Jason Bainbridge,
John Keane,
Luke Stranad,
Jody DeWitt,
John,
Mark,
Anjali Hosla,
Catherine Anderson Karina,
Kathy Kavanaugh,
Sarah Gray,
Biophilia,
Lawrence Graham,
Mike Tripico,
Melissa Hayden,
Diana Gallagher,
Stephanie Folps,
John Ripley,
Ethan Mann,
Timothy Michael Wilson,
Jennifer Slavic,
Rhonda White,
Piet Yitzma,
Henry Deschamps,
David Porter,
Kate Cotton,
Kim Mellon,
Leah Campbell,
Lorraine W. Todd,
Lynn Schneider,
Kevin M. Garnett,
Jared Lombardo,
Karen Humphreys,
Terry Brady,
Maya Hauptman,
Irina Guardia,
Susan Solomon,
Eric Kaplan,
Kenshiro Nakagawa,
Sonia Bogdanovich,
Pam Paris,
Tanya Chalupa.
Thank you all for your support of the show. We could not make Gaslit Nation without you.
Thank you.